Someone said the intro hits different at 7 a.m. I guess it's 7 a.m. for them. And that is the truth. Good morning to most. Good afternoon to the viewing audience across the pond. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to What Fresh Hell, a new show we're trying out where Deep State Kuba gives you updates on the global geopolitical situation as we all prepare for World War III. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, thank you so much for joining us. If you're a new listener, just know I am never up this early unless I have to be. True story. But seriously, thank you for taking the time to check this out. Please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way in promoting the channel. For viewers of the main show, we will be back tomorrow evening at our regularly scheduled time at 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll be speaking with professor and author Thomas Zaitzoff about his new book, No Option But Sabotage, about the rise and fall of the radical environmentalist movements. Now, if you do enjoy all of the diverse programming we provide here on TIR and you would like to join us for our raucous champagne rooms and movie nights, then consider becoming a patron or a paid YouTube subscriber for just $3 a month or a one-time payment of $3 for the year. Your small donation goes a long way in making sure that TIR can continue to stay on air. Now, let's get to why you guys are here. It is official. The U.S. did bomb a school that killed children. Well, many people are trying to wrap their heads around that level of savagery. The U.S. bombed oil facilities, causing a brutal oil rain the following day. If this conflict is simply one for the control of Iranian oil, then why destroy important facilities you'll need in your resource extraction conquest? Cuba is on the precipice of collapse, and while an incredibly small amount of the Cuban diaspora in the U.S. may be thrilled at the prospect of the end of the Castro revolutionary regime, most Americans don't even understand the hostility. Where do we go from here? I don't know, but the man that has some answers is here, and that is Deep State Kuba. After he does read his opening monologue, he will be taking some questions from the viewing audience. Please welcome Deep State Kuba.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to What Fresh Hell, where I answer that question with a rundown of some of the worst and most disturbing events in our continual slide and deterioration towards World War III. If anyone wants to complain about the quality of my audio, then I will dispatch a drone and or stormtrooper team to answer in person what fresh hell they have in store.
And being that it's a TIR drone, the drone just does this to you. We're coming for you, nigga. That's what it says.
Yes. And then it sits over your shoulder and watches as you like and subscribe. It's not leaving. It's not leaving until you hit the bell, you turn on notifications, the whole thing. It will politely look away if you're entering credit card information on Patreon, but that's the limit that we put in terms of AI responsiveness. All right, let me go through my checklist and then we'll turn to questions. First of all, let me congratulate the faithful Habeas Ayatollah. The council in Iran has declared a new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of Ali Khamenei, who was killed in the first round of U.S. and Israeli strikes. I don't know much about him, except that he is not actually an Ayatollah. That is a religious title which requires a certain level of seniority and a certain level of institutional position, institutional status within Shia 12er hierarchies. We do know that Trump had no input in that decision, having previously described him as a middleweight, as somebody who's not a serious person. And so this pick signals defiance in case we needed any more reassurance or any more convincing that the Iranian regime is in it for the long haul. While we're on our Ayatollah news, Ayatollah al-Sistani, which old heads might remember from the Iraq War, uh,
Mm.
issued a fatwa calling for the communal defense of Iran as a religious duty for Shia in this war of aggression launched by Israel and um, the United States. Ayatollah Sistani is a significant figure. He's 96 years old. He's one of the most, technically, I believe he's a grand Ayatollah, and he's one of the most senior figures in Shia Islam. He is based in the shrine city of Najaf in Iraq, and he was notable during the American presence there as a moderating figure. He
Really?
did not call for resistance against the U.S. forces. He was consulted on several times during the course of American efforts there to de-escalate situations where the insurgency had been boiling over and inflicting severe damage and civilian casualties. He has previously issued a fatwa against ISIS. That was his last great political intervention. And that fatwa paved the way for the mobilization of Shia militias and volunteer forces to fight against ISIS in Mosul and northern Iraq. The Picking up from some of the threads from last week, first of all, um, it seems official that the Kurds are sitting this one out. The um, Iraqi Kurdistan regional government announced that it was not interested. It was calling for peace and de-escalation in the regional conflict, that it would not intervene in regional affairs and would concentrate on protecting and defending its own achievements. That um, sentiment was echoed by Trump, who, in his typical Trumpy kind of way, announced that he was never really that into the Kurds anyway, and he's the one who told them that he didn't need them and he wanted them to stay out of this. So it looks like the Northern Front is not going to happen. Picking up on another issue we flagged, desalinization plants have been hit on both sides of the Gulf. The first move was by American forces, which bombed the desalinization plant on Karg Island, a strategically valuable oil processing and export hub sitting right at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, right at the center of the Persian Gulf, rather, in Iranian territory, and containing much of the infrastructure for oil loading, transshipment, and export for Iran. I believe something like 80% of Iranian oil flows out through Karg Island. Iran retaliated with strikes against desalinization facilities in Bahrain. Bahrain has been getting of um, missile strikes, a lot of Iranian attention. This likely has to do with the fact that Bahrain has a Shia majority population. Kuwait, the eastern part of Saudi Arabia along the Persian Gulf, also have significant Shia populations, but they're relative minorities. I think 40% around approximately in the case of Kuwait. That may be a little high. And that specific region in Saudi Arabia has something like 30%, maybe even higher population that's Shia, but in a largely Sunni Arab Saudi Arabia. Bahrain itself has a clear uh, Shia majority, and during the Arab Spring, it was the site of a serious um, uprising that threatened to overthrow um, the ruling family, who are Sunni Arabs that are cousins related distantly to the other ruling families of the Gulf states. It ended with a Saudi intervention across the causeway that links the island to the mainland. The This time in this conflict, Iran may be targeting Bahrain specifically in order to destabilize the government and encourage the the Shia majority to rise up and overthrow it. If that's the case, then this fatwa may be another escalatory move. I'm not suggesting that this was in Sistani's mind. Um, Ayatollah al-Sistani specified that the fatwa applied to Iran, not to Shias globally, but that kind of announcement from a leader of his stature and his prestige will have a galvanizing effect on Shia around the world. The moving on, we've had um, reports that the 82nd Airborne Division and various other units have been mobilized for potential deployment in the Persian Gulf. The 82nd Airborne is a unit that's used as part of expeditionary forces to seize airfields, potentially. They're not special forces, but they can be deployed into enemy territory. Uh, so this might be the first indication that there will be some groups on the ground or ground operations
Oof.
inside of Iran. Two potential objectives have been flagged as possible missions for
Mhm.
American ground forces in Iran. Jason, is there something you wanted to add?
No, no, no. I'm listening. Whenever I hear boots on the ground, I think back to Iraq, and that's kind of when everything went tits up. So, are we trying to speed up the tits up process?
Well, I think that so I've seen several possible theories as to what the 82nd might be used for. One potential operation would be to deploy them inside of Iran to find the fissile material, the stockpile of enriched uranium that the Iranians have maintained, in order to prevent them from moving forward with any potential underground Manhattan Project style um, nuclear program. The other potential plan, and this has been presented in some areas as by some analysts as a kind of 4D chess move, a geopolitical power play, would be to use them to seize Karg Island, the oil depot for Iranian exports. It's relatively small. It is an island, so it's cut off from the mainland. It could potentially be isolated from reinforcements or from counter moves by the Iranian regime. Take control of it, resume operations. There's a significant amount of oil that's stockpiled there that was getting prepared for export. Somehow reopen the Strait of Hormuz and take control of Persian Gulf energy exports with a significant portion now in the hands directly of the United States government. This would be akin to the arrangement that has been carved out with Venezuela, where the United States doesn't actually control the political administration of the country itself, but claims complete ownership of the oil for export. And because of the significant dependence of East Asian economies, not least of which China, on oil exported from the Persian Gulf region, this could be a gambit to establish a choke point over Chinese economic growth and development, use the energy in order to dominate China from a macroeconomic resource perspective. There's been some arguments that was the plan all along, that this was sort of going to be a geopolitical masterstroke to undercut the ability of China to rise as a great power rival to threaten the United States. While China has moved very aggressively to develop renewables and electricity right now in China, thanks to the massive investment in solar and wind energy production, is low enough so that they've managed to wean themselves off of um, Russian electricity exports. At the beginning of the year, they ended, they unilaterally cut a longstanding purchase agreement that they had with Russia for electricity produced in the Russian Far East. Um, not for not out of pressure from Western forces or anything, but just they didn't need it. It was cheaper to produce their own. However, oil is still necessary for certain industrial and especially security applications. Naval vessels are powered by oil. Airplanes powered by jet fuel. You have to have access to oil resources if you're going to power that machinery. This would be a way for the United States to undercut China's access to it. It sounds great, but I believe that this theory massively overestimates the forward thinking of the Trump administration. And there's a few obvious problems with making these connections. The most obvious of which is, why don't they already have the island? If you were going into the fight planning on seizing this crucial bit of oil infrastructure, taking this key terminal, then why didn't you already have the 82nd pre-positioned? Maybe not in the Gulf because you're not protecting those bases, but in Diego Garcia, in Okinawa, in Europe potentially. Plenty of locations where you could have had them trained, organized, and prepared for this operation instead of just calling them up right now after the first wave of bombs have already flown. It really seems as though this is more a post hoc attempt to salvage some kind of um, victory point, some kind of um, ability to say that we've achieved our objectives and we can go home, some kind of tangible outcome, tangible gain, achievement, rather than throwing your hands up saying that the Iranians are too stubborn, that you never wanted this anyway, that this is lame, you're bored, and you're going home, which maybe, which would be deeply delegitimating.
Is that so strange to think that they would say that? Because I don't know if you watched the Pete Hegseth 60 Minutes interview where he said the mission accomplished on a ship was bad optics. And I'm totally paraphrasing because he does not speak like that at all. Um,
I
are we
think
going to
that,
see something worse than mission accomplished, where you're at least giving the facade? Because this does seem like the administration, um, that would literally, they seem like if Adam Sandler was president, so they'd just be like, fuck it, and then make some kind of fart joke
mhm.
about Iran and then leave.
Yeah, the problem is that Iran would have to go along with that in the sense that it would have to stop firing missiles at
Yeah,
Dubai, right? You can't claim victory if you're abandoning your bases and your allies as part of your decision to call it a day and go home. So you would need to have something to potentially give back to them to get them to stop. Maybe that's the idea. If you capture Karg Island, you won't be able to run it anyway. Not under these conditions, not with missiles still flying. But if you capture it, then potentially you could use that as a negotiating, um, as a carrot to offer the Iranian regime, we'll give you back your oil terminal if you let us leave with some dignity intact. That may be that may be the use of the island. The Iranians would still have to go for it rather than saying, fine, you can have the island, but we're going to light it on fire and we're going to light up all of the troops that you have occupying it. We certainly don't see much of an incentive here for the Iranians to stop, largely because the United States has shown that even if you do surrender, even if you do make an agreement, like they did after the 12-day war, like had done previously, um, there's nothing stopping the United States from deciding 4 months later, 6 months later, a year later, that they don't think it was good enough, and they've built up enough missile defenses this time. They've learned some lessons. They've prepared better, and they're going to do it again. Now that the fighting has engaged in earnest, now that Tehran is on fire, now that schools and hospitals are being blown up by the Israelis, um, I think that it would be very challenging for the Iranian regime to climb down without a level of concessions from the United States that would make it impossible for America to spin the outcome as a victory. So we'll see. I mean, there's from a humanitarian perspective, I would very much prefer this war to just end as quickly as possible with as few fatalities as possible, and that life could resume for the survivors, and the region could begin the difficult process of rebuilding. But it feels a lot like the initial moves of Russia into Ukraine.
Mhm.
That time, I had predicted that Ukraine would fold quickly. I underestimated the willingness of country under clear threat and aggression from its neighbors and from traditional enemies to rally around and suffer the significant losses, challenges, humiliation, and destruction that comes from a protracted war in order to preserve their independence and to maintain both their territorial integrity and their honor, their identity as a country and as a people. This time, I'll bet, I'll go the other direction, and I'll assume that the Iranians will hold on longer. And finally, I wanted to identify what might be the first incident in blowback from this conflict. There was an explosion near the American embassy in Norway, in Oslo, that has been linked potentially to Iranian operatives. No one was hurt, no one was killed, at least not in the initial reports. Um, but this is the sort of move that unfortunately we can expect from this kind of conflict, and one which will be exacerbated by the exodus of counterterror experts and Iran specialists from the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, from other law enforcement agencies in the United States. We lost Christy Nome, which frankly, I don't think that one I'm not losing any sleep over. But their leadership shakeup at this time is not optimal from the perspective of anti-terror and counterintelligence operations. In addition, a number of the specific Iran specialists that were tasked with identifying and fighting Iranian-based terror plots inside the United States were recently fired by Kash Patel because they were involved in the investigation of Donald Trump for the um, unauthorized storage uh, and acquisition of classified material. If you remember, he took a bunch
Mhm.
of boxes and boxes of classified materials with him to Mar-a-Lago. Some of those were Iran related, which is how the Iranian experts were brought in. They were just there to identify, oh, these documents are actually classified. These documents are related to um, our investigations into Hezbollah or Iranian plots. This is sensitive information, yay or nay. They weren't doing any kind of political persecution. It was just a professional call. But nonetheless, this was evidence of disloyalty, and they were fired. Now, I'm sure that their expertise, well, you never know with the kind of leadership that we've seen at DHS and the FBI, but I would certainly want them back if I felt responsible for the safety of the United States from these type of terror attacks at this time. I think too that in these personnel purges, we're seeing some of the motivation for going all in on artificial intelligence, especially artificial intelligence in the security sector. Um, the If you do not have enough trust and respect for the human professionals to let them do their jobs, identify targets, um, pursue leads, build cases against foreign threats, then you hope that an all-powerful robot will do it. Having not watched Avengers: Age of Ultron, you see where that.
I'm so used to people saying Terminator that I wasn't ready for the Ultron uh, callback.
Yeah, Jarvis. Like uh, Terminators are just the enforcers. Jarvis is the analyst. Right? That's the nerd version of the AI threat.
Can you tell me a little bit about the doging? Because that's what you're talking. Well, you're talking about Cash Patel firing people, but also there was the doging of a lot of important people as well. I think we just look at the Doge shakeup as just bureaucrats that we find nameless and that make the lines at the DMV long. Um, AI was
Oh,
used to identify quote unquote woke sectors within the government. Um, can you tell us a little bit about that?
so when it comes to the security agencies, they were not subject to Doge in the same way as the civilian agencies. And remember, DHS has had its budget just skyrocket
Mm-hmm.
as a result under the new Trump administration. Similarly, when it comes to the Department of Defense, again, I'm not going to call it the Department of War. You've had larger and larger budgets on offer. So there, there have been there has been a substantial pressure for personnel reductions, but not necessarily budget driven. A lot of that has to do with purging of um, people who were brought in under the Biden administration, anyone who could be plausibly connected to DEI, no more woke
Yeah.
generals, no more woke this, no more woke that, as well as any group that um, was read as being potentially disloyal to Donald Trump or the MAGA governing agenda. That's what happened in the security agencies. The um, However, there are a whole bunch of civilian agencies that have important functions that um, have been gutted as a result of this penny wise, pound foolish Elon Musk Doge approach to budget cutting. USAID, famously,
Mm-hmm.
um, which, apart from its very well established role as an aid agency, fostering American soft power abroad, etc., but well, at least with this audience, it may be even better known for running operations or setting up local organizations, which then become vectors for American power, often in tandem with various intelligence agencies, the three-letter guys. So you lose USAID and you lose those entry points into societies around the world, right? You lose the sources of human intelligence that comes with having people in Iraq or Syria or Turkey that are working with Americans every day, that are interfacing between American officials and the types of groups that American security agencies might be particularly interested in. If you think about, for instance, USAID projects for refugees in Syria, Jordan, Iraq, Turkey, Lebanon. Uh, the Taliban, that is a group that began as refugee boys in the madrasas along the Pakistani-Afghanistan borderland that were then organized and radicalized by um, Islamic extremists from Pakistan and the Gulf. So you have a displaced population that's captive, that's dependent on resources from outsiders, that's desperate for anybody to care, for anybody to provide some kind of services. They could very easily be recruited as militants, agents, informants, you name it. The United States, one, without having an agency like USAID, is out of the game. You can't recruit them to be your guys because you aren't there, right? You've done nothing for it. And two, if you pull out completely, you don't even know who might be recruiting. Is it the Islamic Republic? Is it ISIS? Is it some other group that you've never heard of, but you will? So that's that's a point where I think Doge and those kinds of cuts have done a great deal of damage. They've both blinded the United States and reduced its ability to act internationally. On top of that, we can talk about the cuts at the State Department as well. Some, I think, one third of State Department positions, ambassadorships, and charge d'affaires, like the top two posts, are just vacant because they can't be bothered to fill them. Trump doesn't do diplomacy through the State Department. Trump does diplomacy personally, right? He sends Steve Witkoff, who has no title whatsoever, who's not part of the U.S. government. He sends Jared Kushner, again, no title, not part of the U.S. government, to do his negotiations for him. So why would you bother with an ambassador, right? You just have those posts right now at this point to reward fundraisers or people who have done services to Trump or his machine. But without people filling those roles, again, you're not interfacing with your local counterparts. You're not gathering intelligence. You don't have people figuring out what's going on in all the countries where those posts are empty, and you also aren't providing an adequate level of consular services to individuals who might be Americans in need. For instance, the evacuation, the lack of plans to evacuate American nationals from the Gulf, despite the fact that this war being launched on a timetable dictated by the United States, or at the very least Israel. You could have put those resources into place, but without the personnel to carry them out, you can't get any planning off the ground. You can't actually execute.
Does anyone have any questions for Kuba? We are taking some questions before we wrap this one up. It seems like everyone's listening now, Kuba. they don't. They don't have
A little
anything to say.
intimidating.
Well, there's, you know, I think we did a show about USAID last year, and were you on that show? I feel like you were on that show. I feel like
Sounds like the kind of show that I would be on.
I feel like you were on that show. But when you bring that up in left spaces, regardless of what you're saying, no one listens to you because they want to yell, I guess, certain left signifiers of how radical they are. The USAID is a state project, they overthrow governments. And I'm glad it's gone. It's like, look, none of us really wept over USAID going away. But what we're trying to lay out here is, as so many nodes of American intelligence have disappeared, replaced with nothing. If you're going to replace it with AI, you might have some massive problems.
Exactly. The fact that there isn't there was no shadow organization to replace it, that there was no alternative part of the American apparatus to take over those functions. That's particularly damning. You, um, there was my reading of the situation is that in this kind of Bannon-esque radical MAGA framework, there was an awareness that you have a very short time frame that you can operate unilaterally and radically. get something done. And Project 2025 did lay out some blueprint for it, but the fear on the part of Trump and his acolytes wasn't that they would do too much, but that they would do too little. They wouldn't accomplish a radical enough change. Curtis Yarvin was already complaining about this by March or April last year, that that window was closing and we're not going to deport enough brown people. We're not going to do ethnic cleansing hard enough. We're not going to destroy enough government agencies. And the administrative state would, like lizard losing its tail, would regenerate itself over time. And what has been the real weakness of the Trump administration, I feel, is that it made these massive cuts and changes, but then refused to some to institute some kind of replacement, refused to go through a period of consolidation and retrenchment. It started, it has only just started to recruit enough ICE stormtroopers to fulfill its domestic repressive agenda, but it hasn't done anything about regenerating the deep state, regenerating the deep state in its image, rather, right? Partly because the source for cadres, universities, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, um, and the officer corps of the American military are seen as structurally untrustworthy. Right? These are class enemies from the perspective of MAGA. Too educated, too woke. Um, Pete Hegseth recently removed a list of 20 of the top universities in the United States from receiving funds um, to for graduate education of military personnel because they are too woke. And this includes the top schools in the country. Um, Now, you do this, and there's obviously going to be a cost to readiness and to competence and to the quality of your cadres. And not only that, but the people who might have made really great field agents are now going to be working against you in either the political opposition. If you think about groups like the Bulwark, right? Like Bill Crystal, architect of the Iraq War, is now doing his best to um, promote regime change in Washington, D.C., because even he recognizes the incredible danger that the Trump administration poses to American interests and American security. So you're not replacing the agencies and the institutions and the personnel that you've vaporized. This is a real risk, especially if you are going to play this extraordinarily aggressive foreign policy, starting wars across the world on multiple continents. Trump, uh, we're not even talking about Venezuela anymore, let alone Nigeria. Remember, on Christmas, he bombed the hell out of Nigeria.
Yeah.
And that's just vanished entirely. Uh, who Can you imagine who's running the Nigeria desk at the State Department now after DEI, after Doge cuts and everything? It probably is AI, right? Because
That's frightening.
yeah, like if you pick up a Trump loyalist MAGA chud who answers all the right questions during the screening process, is that guy going to be able to sell a house up from a Fulani? I don't think so. So the what we're seeing right now, I think, is the end result of that those diminishing capabilities, even as the toys and the warfighter lethality that Pete Hegseth is so obsessed with has remained intact. So Trump can launch wars, but he cannot plan them, he cannot organize them, and he cannot get out of them. For that, he requires luck, external intervention, or or maybe the newest instance of Claude AI.
Jesus Christ. Bay Planner wants to know, Kuba, how much of an ecological disaster is the bombing of the Tehran oil depot?
Oh, it's real bad. Oh boy, howdy. The locally, part of what was associated with Gulf War syndrome, the complex of different symptoms and conditions that affected veterans that had served in Iraq, was exposure to all of the toxins that coming out of burning oil fields, petroleum waste. And that's been spread all over Tehran. Right? There are children living there. It's a city of 10 million people. The Iran is not as water stressed as the Gulf states, but do you have the resources available after your country is also getting pulverized economically, pulverized in terms of essential infrastructure, industrial capacity? How are you going to clean this all up afterwards? You're not going to have um, a deep-pocketed sponsor who can roll in and handle everything for you. So the very people who are suffering the most from the devastation then have to deal with the cleanup. So the there's without a doubt you can expect something like Gulf War syndrome, except on the scale of 10 million people in Greater Tehran. Potentially something similar to the birth defects and uh, increased cancer rate associated with Agent Orange and similar um, military toxins coming out of Indochina. It's a big problem. It's a very serious affair. On a global scale, I don't know what this does to overall carbon emissions because more expensive fossil fuels means that you're going to just burn less of them. The economy will slow down as a result. People will do less, will burn less. But then there's all the stuff that's being burned without any economic benefit. The city of Tehran, the oil facilities throughout the Gulf, as well as the bottomless thirst for the American war machine, right? F-35s don't run on unicorn farts and well wishes, right? They burn a lot of oil. All of these operations are extremely polluting, extremely damaging. All of the Iranian Navy is now rusting at the bottom of the Persian Gulf of the Indian Ocean. Those are also massive sources of contamination um, that are going to seriously damage these ecosystems at a time when fisheries are becoming are an essential part of the essential protein source for populations around the world. Yeah, every war has serious ecological consequences in this one. Um, who knows how much damage it could do, especially if it continues for a longer period of time. And to give some idea of how long it might go, I don't trust anything that comes out of the Trump administration because they lie, right? But also they change their mind. Sometimes they don't even know they're lying when they're lying.
That's worse than
But
just lying. Yeah.
yeah, that is worse.
That's way worse.
But there are, it's a little like what Gene was saying about the deployments of um, aircraft carriers. These things take a lot of time to send out. They're very expensive to maintain. They're very expensive to operate. So when they're out there, you're basically committed to using them, or you burn through a whole bunch of money. Um, the in a recent set of orders for military intelligence specialists to report to CENTCOM headquarters, the their orders have specified that they could expect to be there up to 100 days. So 3 more months of this.
We have another question. Given how far Israel has wrapped us into the greater Israel project, is there any way we get out of this without triggering their Samson option?
The Samson option is when they destroy their own. Um, that's use of nuclear weapons. Well, I don't know. I At this point, I I can't say what the limits are for Israeli ambitions, or um, if there are any red lines that they won't cross. If things would probably have to go very bad for them, and potentially this is uh, a pressure point that they can use against Trump in the United States. Right? If you leave before we get what we want, we'll have to go full Samson. Um, I've read that Iran has been threatening to bomb the Israeli nuclear site at Dimona. We've seen that Israel has very effectively penetrated Iranian networks, you know, through a combination of human intelligence and hacking. They knew where the leadership was in order to target their strikes. I don't know if Iran knows where Iranian nuclear weapons are. If Iran does know, then that should probably be their number one priority, right? Disabling or neutralizing that capacity. Because, yeah, it could escalate all the way to the use of those kinds of weapons.
So you meant to say
After
you
all,
don't know if Iran knows where Israeli nuclear weapons are.
exactly, I don't know to what extent Iranian intelligence has any insight into the Israeli nuclear program. The, the reality is that I don't have security clearance for the Americans, let alone the Islamic Republic. Um, I'm not even a mullah, let alone an ayat. I don't have Ayatollah level clearance. So it could be that there's a plan to try to neutralize um, Iranian, Israeli nuclear assets. It could also be that this is why there remains a certain level of restraint in the response of Iran. For instance, the Houthis haven't been activated to close down the Red Sea. Oh, actually, there's one other issue that I wanted to flag today, but maybe I'll keep that for the next episode. That's a teaser.
Good. This is from M. Toussaint, TIR member. Good morning, everyone. Not sure if this was covered, but it was important for the plan, she writes in quotations, that Venezuela was toppled first, then Cuba destabilized, then Iran attacked in terms of oil. Also, what is the plan?
I think that talking about a plan with this cast of characters is a bit of wishful thinking. That Trump has personalized decision making and especially foreign policy in his own decaying set of preferences and impulses and reactions. I don't see a larger strategic vision for what the United States should become, or how the United States secures and maintains its dominance for the next 20 years, which is what a president should be thinking of, which is what a national security strategy is about. Remember, there have been particular preoccupations and enthusiasms that get brought up and then put aside. Greenland was really, really big for a while, very, very urgent, and now that doesn't get mentioned at all. I was very concerned about Canada Um, there has been a very obvious operation in the province of Alberta and online to try to encourage Albertan separatism, to try to undermine confidence in a potential referendum vote. I thought that this was an attempt to engineer a pretext for American intervention in order to liberate the good people of Alberta. And I think it was. Right? But that plan has been put aside. Trump can only think of two things at once, maximum. So that gets shoved over. Instead, we focus on Iran now. Venezuela, I think the sequencing was only um, significant in that Venezuela was easy and right there. And to a certain extent, in the way that you deploy forces to get there, the way that you use air assets and naval assets, it's a bit of a test run for more ambitious plans elsewhere. Now, when it comes to Cuba, the blockade of Cuba hurts, but I don't think conditions are so dire. And I think that the resources being tied up in the war with Iran make decisive confrontation over Cuba less and less likely. I've heard reports that potentially there might be some kind of deal in the work with the government of Cuba. We'll see how that ends up, but that certainly has been deprioritized. So I don't see a master plan behind this, not an American master plan. When we talk about Israeli sequencing, that's different because we've seen a clear pattern where one regime after another that could have been regional rivals or regional enemies, regional threats to Israeli interests, has been deposed and decapitated by the United States and Israel working in tandem, whether it's Saddam Hussein in Iraq or the government of Assad in Syria, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon. The Houthis have been boxed in to their mountainous enclave in Yemen. Um, and even to a certain extent, this is just a theory of mine. I I don't have I can't point to any evidence. I don't have seen secret sources, but trying to um, combine that, think of the pieces might fit together. Qatar as host of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas as a neutral venue that has been able to play a mediator role in disputes between various forces in the Middle East and the United States, as well as various forces in the Middle East and each other, as well as the UAE, which has had an active foreign policy, very aggressive engagement in Yemen, very aggressive engagement in Somalia and Sudan, right, pursuing its own interests distinct from Israel's, even though they signed Abraham Accords and everything. It seems as though there won't be that many tears shed in Tel Aviv over the fate of the Gulf countries, and potentially the, their weakness coming out of this conflict will make it easier for Saudi Arabia to assert regional dominance over the GCC, knock the upstarts in Doha and Abu Dhabi down a peg, and really assert itself as a big brother in the region. Um, and then you only have one Gulf state to negotiate with, and MBS and BB do have a connection through Trump and through the Trump extended universe. So
Trump Rogues Gallery Extended Universe.
Exactly. It's interesting that Neftali Bennett, and we talked about this a little in the previous episode, that Neftali Bennett singled out Turkey, not Saudi Arabia, but Turkey as the next big bad, right? The season 4 villain. Um, and I think that there is some potential for a Saudi Israeli entente. That may be how you end this conflict without resorting to nuclear weapons and without sort of total destabilization.
This question is from Political Pain. What do we know about Israel's collaborators in Iran, the ones sharing the intel about that led to the strike?
Well, my understanding is that the Israelis have, I know very little about the ins and outs of Mossad operations across the Middle East. Basically, I read the same things that you guys do. I've seen the same movies. I do know that they have uh, the ability to penetrate very deep into supply chains, and apparently they hacked the traffic cameras all across Tehran um, months ago. So they had a view of the movement of um, figures related to the regime, their comings and goings, where they are at all times. That's how they got the information about where to strike. That's what I've heard about the Israeli side. Apparently, it was the Americans who claim that their intelligence has come from human sources. I don't know much about that. I do know that the Israelis recruit heavily through blackmail. They're willing to threaten your family. So if you're going to go all the way to being that dark, then yeah, it's not surprising that people have a lot of trouble saying no.
This question is from Dusty. Is Trump bombing? Is Trump with bombing the oil fields? Lindsey Graham is yelling about not to bomb the oil fields. Trump says he's taking the oil and bombing it. So I guess the question is, what's with bombing oil fields if you're supposed to be taking the oil?
So my understanding, and I can only talk briefly about this because I haven't uh, gone taken a deep dive into the petroleum infrastructure of Iran. But Kharg Island has got oil stored for export. So that oil is ready to take. When it comes to oil extraction, that's the sort of thing that's being hit. And you would hit those sites, one, to prevent, to deprive Iran of having any source to fund its reconstruction at the end of the war, and two, to prevent it from using those that oil production to fund its industry and its military operations. So I think that you need to distinguish from the oil that's stealable from the oil that is usable by Iran, but not accessible for a quick smash and grab.
And we have here, let me see.
It's I
Broad
don't use
question.
it for cigar storage. I mostly use it to keep the Ewoks fresh.
Broad question here. More of a theory. One, could we ever build a less bureaucratic, more direct society, or are bureaucracies inevitable for large societies? Could AI actually help reduce bureaucracy?
So the bureaucracies are one fundamental issue that um, the Bolsheviks identified when they were trying to run the Soviet economy was that you um, if you're operating industrial concerns or any kind of large organization, you need people to manage it. And it creates inequality between managers and workers because there's people who are making the decisions and then there's people who are carrying out the labor. And it's a different set of skills, it's a different role. If you try to make everybody equal, well, let me put it this way. There were two Marxist solutions, two Marxist-Leninist solutions. One was the Stalinist solution, where you get away from the problem of bureaucratic hierarchy by terrifying bureaucrats, terrorizing bureaucrats. You will just round up people and execute them for no reason. And as a result, they are too frightened to use their authority for their own self-interest. That was the system that Stalin imposed on the Soviet Union and mountains of debt. Mao had a different solution, which is don't industrialize. Keep everything at the level of the village. Don't build a bureaucracy. And there you ended up with also mountains of debt. So it is a fundamental challenge. How do you organize without creating bureaucracies where administrators have some level of opaque power and authority which they could potentially abuse? If you were to replace all of that with AI, you're moving from a black box that consists of the interactions of countless human beings that have their own interests, which may run counter to the general good, with an actual black box that contains a whole bunch of circuitry and God knows what's going on in there. Could it be better? I don't know. Maybe. And we'll probably find out, but it won't be up to any of us.
Well, that was the last question. If you guys have more questions for Cuba, or if you didn't get your question answered, definitely leave it in the comments. If you went back to the last show, Cuba did leave very nice paragraph length answers to people who actually had very sincere and serious questions. So again, we do appreciate all the interaction that you guys are giving us on this show. Thank you. Do it. More people need to watch this. So thank you very much. We will be back for another one. Kuba and I will discuss that off air when that's going to be, as we only have him for a limited time for these early morning shows. So thank you again, Kuba. And I was going to say get some rest, but it's still relatively early where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not the worst, dude. I'm going back into the bureaucracy.
Well, thank you guys, and I'll see you guys tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific time for a very interesting show about the rise and the fall of the radical environmental movement. I think you guys are going to dig that one. And on that note, we are
out.
Peace.